Hello, Hasbro fans. Welcome to the digital event of the year, Hasbro Pulse Con. I'm your host, Jackie Jennings, and I'll be here with you for 2 days of incredible content, reveals, guest stars, insider information about all of your favorite Hasbro brands, and so much more. Now, guys, this event is totally interactive, so we need you, the Hasbro superfans, watching and playing along at home. This event is not just for fans, it's by fans. So grab some snacks, sit back, and get ready for 2 epic days. We know a lot of you are here for the new product drops, so let's cover that. On both days, US and Canadian fans will be able to shop some of the incredible reveals you'll see each day starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Hasbro Pulse or participating retailers. Also, as an added bonus, we have 20 songs from your favorite E1 artists heard during the Hasbro PulseCon live stream available in an exclusive Spotify playlist. Just search for Hasbro PulseCon on Spotify to hear more. In addition, for every viewer of Hasbro PulseCon, Hasbro will donate a toy or game to Toys for Tots up to 100,000 pieces. Through the gift of a new toy, Marine Toys for Tots helps bring hope and joy to America's less fortunate children. Okay. So now that that's all covered, let's talk about today's amazing lineup. Today's content starts with our partners at Wizards of the Coast, and of course, that means Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons. Expect epic information and also some killer tips from one of our favorite dungeon masters, Joe Manganiello. We also have the long-awaited return of the classic tabletop game, Hero Quest. Next, some incredible content comes your way from Star Wars, including guest stars Ashley Eckstein and D. Bradley Baker. And then we pivot over to Marvel for product reveals, a special sneak peek of Marvel 616, guest stars, and so much more. We also have a very special performance by E1 artist Lights to close out day one. We hope you're excited as we are, so without any more waiting, let's kick off the show. Welcome to Hasbro PulseCon. All right, let's do it. Okay, wow. So that's where our journey begins. This is the PulseCon board, and we're going to be moving through the amazing worlds of all these great brands. I can already see a lot of cool stuff hidden there for us to discover together. So let's hit start and get this going, shall we? That's pretty cool. I mean, I'm biased, but that's very cool. All right, leading things off, we're going to go to one of the most storied franchises in gaming history. Time to turn things over to the Magic the Gathering team and hear some stories from Zendikar Rising from head designer Mark Rosewater and our moderator Blake. Take it away, you guys!
Thank you, Jackie. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We're coming to you from not so sunny Seattle today. Welcome to the first panel of PulseCon 2020, a look at Zendikar Rising, Magic's latest and greatest set. It's available now digitally, and it's out in game stores today all around the world. And we're going to go on a little adventure and talk about Zendikar Rising and who else could take us on that adventure other than head designer for Magic and the lead vision designer for Zendikar Rising, Mark Rosewater. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, thanks for having me. We got to talk Zendikar Rising, one of my favorite things to talk about.
Mark, if you don't know Mark is very enthusiastic about all things Magic, so no one else could tell us all that we're going to get today about Zendikar Rising. But make sure that you put your questions in the chat. We have some top people scouring chat for the best questions. We're going to get to them at the end of the show after we've already covered a lot of ground. But I want to make sure that we get to what you want to hear. So let's start, Mark. We're going to start with one of the big innovations coming out of Zendikar Rising, the modal double face cards. They're cards that can be played as either side. So let's show the dual lands here. We're going to talk about more about some other versions of these cards coming up. But Mark, talk about what makes modal double face cards special and where the idea came from.
Okay, so we have to flash back to Innistrad. So we are in the middle of designing Innistrad, the original Innistrad, and we needed the werewolves. We really hadn't done a lot of werewolves in Magic, and I think we'd done 3 at the time. I'm like, okay, we're going to introduce werewolves. What's the coolest thing we could do to show werewolves? and we ended up coming up with what we call transforming double face cards, which is you play it as a human, you turn into a werewolf, and it goes back and forth between them. But when we designed those, we realized that there was more you could do with double face cards. And we actually designed the modal double face cards the same time we designed the transforming double face cards. But we didn't want to do both of them in the same set. We knew it'd be kind of confusing. Innistrad was all about transformation, so it made sense to start with the transforming double face cards. But in my back pocket, we had modal double face cards. I had made split cards many years earlier in Invasion, and the idea of choosing to do one of two things has always been really cool. And split cards, we only get to do instants and sorceries. So modal double face cards are kind of like a cross between double face cards and split cards, two of my favorite things. So mixing them together was something that I was excited to do. I kind of had it in my back pocket, and I was waiting for like the right time to do it. And I bided my time, and finally we found the perfect set to introduce them, Strixhaven.
So how did they end up in Zendikar? Strixhaven, for those who don't know, is a set we've got coming out in 2021. It's a couple sets from now. How did they end up in Zendikar?
So what happened was, when I first introduced split cards, there was a lot of resistance, and I had to sort of prove them, and I did, and the audience really loved them. And when I did double face cards, there was a lot of internal resistance, and I had to prove that they worked, and then the audience really loved them. So when I was going to combine the two, I'm like, they love split cards. The audience loves split cards. The audience loves double face cards. I should have no problem. Not the case. So I had to prove that these. Aaron Forsyth, who's my boss, he said, okay, but let's start early. Let's do an advanced design. Let's do some exploratory design way ahead of time so that you can show how awesome these are, so that I can show to other people how awesome these are. And so we did a design team very, very early. And when we designed them, there were so many different designs, I realized that we had more than one set available. That actually, one of the cool things we could do was do it all sort of Magic year long. So not only does Zendikar Rising have double face cards, or modal double face cards, but so does Kaldheim, and so does Strixhaven.
Okay.
And one of the things, by the way, that I've been trying to do, and this was a perfect opportunity, is early Magic used to have blocks. For many, many years, we would do 3 sets in a row that are all connected. And when we moved to the new system, it's kind of cool that every set, we can stay on a world as long as we want. We can be there for 1 set, for 2 sets, for 3 sets, but we tend to move around a lot. And this year, for example, we're visiting 3 different worlds. But I'm trying to find ways to connect the year a little more. The old system, well, you're on one world the whole year, so it was very connected. The mechanics would overlap more. So I'm trying something new here where we're doing some mechanic that's being stretched across all 3 sets. Now, each set's going to handle them differently, but modal double face cards will be sort of a Magic year-long thing.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some individual cards, and we'll start with the dual lands that we have up on the screen. And probably the question we've gotten the most since we started previewing Zendikar Rising is, why are there 6 of these, Mark? We do things in 5s. There are 6. It's weird.
Okay, well, let me talk a little bit about why the pathways got made, and then I'll explain why there's 6 and not 5. When we first started making modal double face cards, like the key is you want to make interesting decisions, right? You can do thing A or thing B. And we knew with Zendikar, we wanted thing B to be a land, because Zendikar's all about land. It's a land mechanical themed set. It's been that way since we first introduced Zendikar. And so the idea of introducing modal double face cards here, where you get to do something on the front and a different thing on the back that's always a land, seemed to make a lot of sense. And one of the very clear things early on was the idea of land and land, that you would have land on both sides. If you go all the way back to Mirage, we made the original fetch lands in Mirage. And the idea was that when you play it, you choose one of 2 colors, and then it just taps for that color. But in order to make that work, we had to go into a library, you had to go get a basic land, and then bring it out and put it into play. That was just the way we could make it work. But modal double face cards that let us do exactly what we wanted to do originally with fetch lands, but in a simpler way that didn't require going into the library, which is both options are right on the card. Now, why are there 6 and not 5? When we made the set, there's a mechanic we'll talk about in a second called Party. And Party cares about 4 creature types. It cares about clerics, rogues, warriors, and wizards. And each one of those, in order to make them work, we tied them to we took 4 of the colors. We took green aside for a second, and of white, blue, black, and red, each one of them was primary in one of these classes, secondary in one of these classes, tertiary, and absent. So the idea is you took something like Warriors. Warriors primary in red, secondary in white, tertiary in, I think, is it black or blue? Black, I think. And then
Black.
absent in blue, I believe, is how it works. And the idea is that when we were doing tribal stuff, we took the primary and secondary. So, for example, with clerics, that was white and black. With rogues, that was blue and black. With warriors, it was red and white. And with wizards, it was blue and red. So we knew we wanted the dual land that matched the 4 classes we were supporting. The problem is there's no green. And so if we added a 5th land, we could choose a land to produce green, but then you would have, it wouldn't match up. Normally when we do 5 lands, whether they be ally lands, whether they be enemy lands, whether they be a mix like we do in Ravnica sets, they always even out. They're always, all the colors show up at the same amount. And there was no way to add a 5th land because there was no green. If we added another, one, let's say the 5th land had green in it, there'd be 1 land that produced green, and 1 color would show up 3 times. And it was just kind of inelegant. And so we decided, let's not do 5 because it just will feel weird. So instead, let's do 6. This is the land set. We might as well, like if we go 6 and 4, put 6 in the land set. So what we did is we took the 2 green ally cards. That way there'll be 3 allies and 3 enemy combinations, and we do them up front here. And then the very next set, call time, we'll do the other 4.
Okay, so that we're doing them in Kaldheim. They're coming.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and a lot of people have asked this. They're called pathways in Kaldheim. We're doing the same things we did in Zendikar Rising. There'll be the full art versions of them. So, like, if you anything, we want to make sure when they all come together, they feel like a cycle of 10. And while the second 4 technically do take place in Kaldheim, they're going to look a lot like these ones look. So they will feel like a cycle of 10.
Yep, and of course, Kaldheim's coming in early 2021. So let's go through some more modal double face cards. These are the only ones that have lands on both sides. So the rest that we're going to look at have a land on one side and something else on the other side. So let's look at the first one, creatures and lands.
So one of the things, so when I first made split cards way back when, we had talked over the years of maybe instead, split cards tend to have an instant and or sorcery on them. And we talked about, well, what happened if we put a creature on it? Well, maybe you could just play the creature. And the rules do not like it when there is an instant or sorcery on the battlefield. And if there were 2 permanents on a split card, you didn't know which permanent it was. And so it just didn't work with split cards to have permanents. So once we got to modal double face cards, I'm like, oh, this is the perfect opportunity. And one of the neat things about the modal double face cards in Zendikar Rising is that you have interesting choices to make. And creatures are neat because that if I need a creature, I can put it in my deck, but I know I have access to the mana when I want it. And in with landfall, where lands mean something even late game, sometimes even late game, you might want to play it as a land. But we knew creatures and lands were one of the very first things we designed. We knew we wanted to do that.
Okay. Well, let's move on to sorceries and lands. So here we have a regrowth variant with a land on the back, which seems pretty powerful to me. Talk about these, Mark.
So one of the interesting things about doing these, what we found when we worked in the design was it is pretty valuable to have a card that can be a land. Even if it's a come into play tapped, tapped for 1 color land, that's a lot of flexibility. And so what we did is we try to find spells that were useful some of the time, but not necessarily all the time, so that they're conditional. And one of the things sometimes that's hard is it's hard to put some conditional cards in your deck because you might not need that condition. But because they can always be lands, they always have value. So even if you don't need them for the front side, you can use the back side. And so sorceries and instants definitely made good options for that.
Okay. Speaking of instants, our next one is a straight up creature kill spell that has a land on the back, Cog Molly.
Yeah, so like I said, the neat thing about these, and one of the things that was challenging, and I know set design, play design spent a lot of time on this, is how much do you charge for, like, how much of a bonus is it that you have a land on the back? And in early design, we assumed it was less of a bonus. And then basically what we found was, it's better than you think. This is one of those mechanics that you first think at, you think, and then the spell didn't need to be particularly powerful to be powerful when combined with having a land on the back.
Yeah, I mean, this spell in particular, the front side is not particularly powerful. An instant to kill any creature these days costs 3 mana typically, and this one mostly costs 4, but it's still a very, very powerful card.
Well, the flexibility, what you find is the flexibility is super powerful.
Yep, absolutely. Speaking of flexibility, this might be the most flexible card in the entire set. It's a clone that can also be a land.
Right. So one of the things we were looking for, especially on some of the higher rarity stuff, is finding really interesting and neat things to do. Like, we knew that all of these were going to have a land on the back, but we liked the idea of what were exciting things that we can do on the front, so that because the land is on the back, you can play more expensive things and you can do more things that definitely might be harder to put a lot of in a deck, but you can stick more of them because of that.
And then at the Mythic rarity, one of the things you did is you made it so that not only were the frontside spells very splashy, very powerful, but that the backside could actually come into play untapped sometimes.
Yeah, so what we decided was, because getting the land is pretty powerful, on all the uncommons and most of the rares, other than I think the pathways, they come into play tapped. Just because that it's very valuable. We need some negative to the land side because it's very powerful to be able to have the option of getting a land. For the Mythic Rare cycle, we decided to do something a little cool, a cool thing, which was, okay, you have the option on these to actually have them come play untapped. Cost 3 life, so it's not insignificant, but we gave you the option to do that. And these ones, also the Mythic Rares tend to be the most expensive on the front. Like I said, normally it's hard to get really big spell. It's hard to get a lot of very big spells in your deck. But because that these can double as lands, it really lets you sort of squeeze a little bit more in than normal. And one of the things that I really love, by the way, about modal double face cards is I always like when we do something and it makes the audience have to rethink something they already know. For example, I say you're going to build a 60-card deck. You know how many lands you're going to have within 1 or 2. You're going to have 23, 24 lands in a 60-card deck. But these really make you rethink that. Like, what do these count as a full land, a half a land? How do you, when you're building your deck, how many lands go in when some of the lands are these lands? And one of the things I enjoy as a Magic designer is I love when we do things that make you just have to rethink staple things that you always know that are always true, and all of a sudden maybe it's not what you're normally used to, and that's really fun for Magic design.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on to something you alluded to earlier, the party mechanic. And this is one of the other new mechanics from Zendikar Rising, and it's an ability that focuses on, as you said, having a rogue, a cleric, a wizard, and a warrior in play in your party. Where did this idea come from, he says, looking at some of the Dungeons & Dragons stuff in the back of your screen?
So what happened was, when we started designing this, one of our goals was we had gone to Zendikar, and then the Eldrazi had shown up, and when we went back to Zendikar, it was really about this war with the Eldrazi, which kind of, the focus drifted a bit from the original Zendikar, which was this kind of glorious adventure world. And we knew when we went back, we wanted to go back to Adventure World. We really wanted to recapture a lot of what made original Zendikar very charming. And so part of that is the idea of the adventure party. Originally, in Zendikar, we did the allies, which is kind of how we filled that in. But yeah, kind of inspired by Dungeons & Dragons and a lot of adventure tropes, the idea of an adventure party is really cool. And one of the things is, we know the audiences love tribal themes. Tribal themes are very, very popular. We've done them many, many times. But we always tend to do them vertically, right? Get a goblin and then get as many goblins as you can. I was very interested in the idea of going horizontal. Well, what if instead of getting lots of one thing, you want to get one of a lot of different things? And when we started talking about the adventure party, like, we literally sat down and wrote up on a whiteboard of, like, what do people expect and what are all the trope space we're exploring? And the adventure party was something that seemed like there's a lot of meat on the bones, if you will. And it reminded me the idea of a horizontal tribal. It's something we had talked about before. I didn't find the right place to do it, but this just seemed like the perfect thing. Like, oh, you're going to have an adventure party. Well, you need to have a fighter, you need to have a magic user, you need to have a thief, you need to have a religious person doing religious magic and stuff. And so what we realized was, this actually worked pretty well with our class-based system, right? That magic user, we have wizards. We literally have a creature type called wizard. We literally have a creature type called rogue. We literally have a creature type called cleric. Now the fighter, magic doesn't have fighter, but we looked at all the different creature types that talk about fighting. There's warrior, there's soldier, there's barbarian, there's berserker, there's samurai and ninja, there's knight. There's a lot of different things we use to talk about fighting.
A lot of fighters. Yeah.
So what we ended up doing was we narrowed it down to soldier and warrior because those are the ones we tend to use the most. And then soldier felt more like you belong to a larger group or organization, where a warrior felt more like you're alone. Maybe you would join up with an adventure party. So we ended up going with warrior.
All right. Okay. Well, you talked a lot about the Dungeons and Dragons influence. We have a Dungeons and Dragons set coming out next fall called Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. Why not do this mechanic there?
Well, interestingly, when we actually designed Zendikar Rising, the D&D set wasn't a thing yet. And so it was, in fact, the popularity of the party mechanic that really kind of inspired R&D. We've been talking about doing a D&D set forever. It's something, obviously our company makes Dungeons & Dragons as well as Magic. And so it's something we had talked about. And when we had made the mechanic, it really got people excited. And I think it was the party mechanic that kind of really got us to make the D&D set. So when that happened, we went to them and said, hey, when we made this, we didn't know there was going to be a D&D set. Do you want the party mechanic? And they said, there's a lot of cool stuff we're doing. We kind of like that you're doing this. It's kind of a teeing the ball for us, later in the year. So you keep the party mechanic. And so we kept it in the set, and here it is.
Very cool. Now, we're going to tell some individual card stories for the party mechanic coming up, but I want to remind anyone who's come late that we are taking your questions, put them in chat, and our team of top people behind the scenes are going to feed them to us, and we'll answer them at the end of our little session. But let's walk through some of these party cards. So, Mark, the one we've had up on the screen Acquisitions Expert, it is a member of the party. It cares about party. Talk about these kinds of cards.
Okay, so first up, the number one thing we decided we could do with party cards is what we call scaling effects. And what a scaling effect is, you do something that usually has a number associated with it. And what we realized is, well, your party could be, 1, 2, 3, or 4. It could be 0, I guess, but you wouldn't cast the card yet. But it could be 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then you get to do the effects scaling based on that number. Now, creatures are perfect because the creature gets to be a member of the party. So when you do enter the battlefield effects, you know that the number's at least 1 because you have that. And so one of the things that's cool is trying to figure out how to do those scaling effects. Like this card right here this is a discard effect, right? Well, how do you do a discard effect? Discarding 1 card or 2 cards or 3 cards or 4 cards, that's too much variance, as we like to say in Magic Design. That's too wide a swing. So what we're able to do instead is, look at that many cards and then make them discard 1. So 1 gets you a discard. So as long as you play the creature, they're guaranteed to discard a card, but have a full party. And now I'm looking at them, a good chunk of their hand, so that I have more choice of what they're going to discard.
Makes sense. All right, next up we have Concerted Defense, a spell that cares about the number of cards in your party.
Okay, so the tricky thing about spells is, with a creature, you're guaranteed it to be 1, right? Because the creature itself will always be a member of the party, or one of the party classes. With spells, you're not guaranteed that. So originally we had a lot more spells, but what we found was they were a little bit harder to use because you needed to make sure you had creatures first. So what we tend to do with these is, we lowered the number of them, and we tended to make them either more expensive or more reactive, meaning you're more likely to have creatures out before you would cast them, because obviously they don't work till you get some creatures out. But they are fun, and there's some neat things you can do. So we did keep a few of the spells, but I would say that early in the file, we had a lot more spells. We cut down on the number of spells.
Yep, here's another one, Strength of Solidarity, that is a pump spell that gets bigger with the number of people in your party.
So one of the things that's always fun when you're doing these is trying to figure out what are the incremental effects you can do where changing the number matters, but it doesn't run away with the game. Like we need to keep the variance within a certain limit. You know what I'm saying? You don't want the difference between 1 and 4 to be wildly different. So you want to find effects. And +1/+1 is a really good example where, hey, it matters. An extra +1/+1 can save your creature. But it's a kind of thing where even if I have a full party, yeah, it's better, but it's not going to sort of just crush your opponent. Like we want to make sure that these cards are good, but not, one of the things in general when you're trying to make mechanics is you have to balance them. Like when we're making stuff in vision design, I got to think about set design and play design. And so we're always looking to make sure that we can do things that there's knobs that they can work with. And party is a really weird mechanic in that the main knob isn't adjustable all that much, right? That whatever, it's 1 to 4, it's going to be 1 to 4. That's what party is. And so picking what the effects are you have to be very careful on what the effects are.
That makes sense. Well, one of the effects we also used was cost reduction, like we see on Shatterskull Minotaur here.
So obviously a lot of the scalable effects could be the effect itself, how big the effect is. But there's other ways to make use of this technology, and cost reduction is a really good example, which is, maybe this gets better as you have more party, not because the effect changes at all. It's the same effect no matter what, but the cost gets reduced. And so we were able to make, I think, a cycle of these. So this is a nice thing. Like one of the things we did when we had this mechanic in Vision is we made lots and lots of different things we could do with it. And then in set design, they're like, this really works. This really works. Oh, this doesn't work as well. And they could pick and choose what they liked. And this is one of the things we offered that they really enjoyed. And so, like I said, it actually showed up in a whole cycle on the set.
Yeah. And then the last party card we want to talk about cares if you have a full party.
Right. So obviously we can do a lot of scalable effects. The other thing we do is what we call the threshold effect. And what that means is this card, for example, the second effect, it has one effect that scales, but the second effect, you have to have a full party. It's either you get it or you don't. And the reason we did that was we really want to encourage you, like we want to have an end state that's exciting, right? We want to get you to have a full party. So on some of the higher rarity cards, we were able to just do a big upgrade when you get there. So there's a challenge, because getting 4 creatures out and have the 4 creatures be 4 different numbers, that's a lot. That's a big hoop, as we say. And so, or I get small hoops that you got to get through it. But anyway, it was something that we knew would be hard enough that allowed us to really do splashy things. Like it's hard to make the 4 in a 1, 2, 4 as splashy as it is to do the threshold thing. So that way we could sort of, you have to get to the end state to get the big effect. And so originally, by the way, when we first made Party, the very first version of it was either on if you had 4 or off if you didn't. And it was really, really, really hard to make happen. And so we ended up going to the scaling version, but then we came back and said, maybe this as an extra added bonus for splashy effects might be really cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to move on from the party mechanic. We're going to start with the probably the second most popular question we get after the Y6 modal double-faced lands. Actually, no, I'm wrong. First, we want to talk about the filling out your party cards.
Okay, so when we first made the party mechanic, one of the things we played around with in Vision design was, to make it easier, do we want to have like creatures that are 2 types? It's a rogue wizard, it's a warrior cleric. And what we found was that they were so efficient that we had a cost for cards. Like we had to assume you had those, and then if you didn't have them, they were too weak. And so we ended up pulling them out of the file. But set design found another answer that was a pretty clever answer, which is, I explained earlier that white, blue, black, and red were the colors we rotated around. Green ended up being the color that was primary nothing, but kind of tertiary in everything. It's the only color that has all 4 in it. And one of the tools we found to help was having these creatures, 2 of which are green, one's an artifact, obviously, that could be everything. Now, note, when you play it, this doesn't give you your full party. You have to have 4 different creatures, but this gets to be sort of the wild card, if you will. It gets to be whatever you need it to be. And so it makes it really, it really helps you fill out your party. Because sometimes when you're playing, like, I didn't draw my warrior, but I drew an extra cleric or something. Well, if you draw one of these cards, it gets to fill in. It gets to be what you want. And the common one, you'll notice, not only is it colorless, but it also helps you with your mana, because what we found was when you're doing party decks in limited, you tend to want to play more colors, and it helps you sort of color fix so that you can play the party decks.
Makes sense. All right, now we're moving on from party to the probably one of the second most popular questions we've gotten for this set is we've started doing some black enchantment destruction. Why, Mark? Why?
So one of the things that happens in Magic is a lot of decisions got made early, and we sort of just we went along with a lot of them just because, okay, it made sense and there's inertia and stuff. But one of the most important things about Magic design is you have to stop and ask questions sometime and say, well, I know you do it this way, but is that right? Is this the correct way to do things? So a couple years ago, Eric Lauer, who's my equivalent, like sort of he's the head set designer, he came to me and said, it's weird that black is the only color that can't destroy two different things. That's not true. I mean, other than blue that can't destroy anything, there's no color that can't destroy two things. And it's also weird that artifacts have three colors that can deal with them, and enchantments only have two. And so what we realized was by letting black destroy enchantments, it's kind of made this nice balance of things. Like if you look at targeted removal, once again, blue doesn't destroy anything because it counters spells. But now each color has a card type that it doesn't have targeted destruction of. White can't destroy target land. Green can't destroy target creature. Red can't destroy target enchantment. And now black can't destroy target artifact. And so by balancing this out, it also meant there now be three colors that destroyed artifacts and three colors destroyed enchantments. But the reason we hadn't had black destroy enchantments early on, we went back and thought about it, was black does a lot of what we call deal with the devil enchantments, where you do an enchantment and it comes back to burn you. And we really like those cards. So we didn't want to make it easy for for black to get rid of those. So what we said is, okay, a couple things. One is we're not going to let black get rid of his own enchantments. So you'll notice here, it only gets rid of the other player's enchantments. And we wanted it to generally be weaker than white and green. The white and green are more efficient. That if you're trying to destroy enchantment, white and green are generally better at it. And we first introduced it last year with things that made your opponent have to sacrifice enchantments. It was a little weak, wasn't quite doing what we wanted. So what we tend to do is when we introduce things, we introduce them, they'll increment up if we need to. So now we're trying targeted removal. It comes with a life loss. You can't destroy your own. So it's not quite as efficient as whites can be, or white or green. But it is something that we're trying to give black some access to this ability. So we're trying something new. As I always say is, look, maybe we overshot a little bit. We'll sort of figure out where black's supposed to end up. But this is us just, like, the color wheel is something that's flexible, that is in flux. I mean, we want to make sure that we're keeping the integrity of it whole, but it is something that has the ability over time to shift a little bit, and this is us consciously shifting it to try to fix something that we realized was imbalanced.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure we get to people's questions, but we got two more slides we want to talk about. And the first one is Lotus Cobra, a card that is a reprint from the first time we went to Zendikar.
So the funny stuff about Lotus Cobra is we're in design for original Zendikar, and we want to do a land mechanic. We ended up making like 40 different mechanics. We ended up with landfall, which we really loved, and we were trying to make effects. So we were actually making a common green card, and like, what's like a basic thing green can do? Oh, how about a mana? Okay, landfall, get a mana. Get any color. That's what green does. And it was very playtest. It didn't take long in playtesting to realize this was a strong card. So it went from common to uncommon, and then it went from uncommon to rare, and then late in development of Zendikar, we didn't like one of the Mythic Rares, and so they decided to swap the Lotus Cobra to Mythic Rare. And I was not a fan. I had written the article all about sort of our philosophy of Mythic Rares, and I felt that like Lotus Cobra wasn't as cleanly Mythic Rare about how I described it, and I really thought it made more sense at Rare. And R&D was split in half, and there was like a rare contingent and a Mythic Rare contingent. I led the rare contingent, but I lost, and so we ended up printing a Mythic Rare. The one change I did make, when it was clear it was going to be Mythic Rare, is I got the name changed to Lotus Cobra, because that felt Mythic Rare. And then it came out, and because I'm the spokesperson, I have to explain why we do things. And so people yelled at me about how this being Mythic Rare didn't quite match up with the article that I had written, and then I had to defend it, even though I fought so hard for it to be rare. But anyway, we're back here in Zendikar. In Battle for Zendikar, we had lowered the sort of the general level of landfall. It didn't get played much. Like original Zendikar landfall was very powerful, got played a lot and constructed. Battle for Zendikar, not so much. When we returned, we really wanted to sort of bring landfall back to its glory. Eric said he thought we could do that because there weren't fetches in the environment, which helped a lot. And so I think it was Eric's decision to bring back Lotus Cobra, and I'm excited that got brought back at rare, which is the rarity that I wanted in the first place.
Makes sense. All right, I want to make sure we have time for questions, but I do want to cover this last topic. Planeswalkers that have set mechanics is something that's new. Talk about these two, Mark.
When we first made the Planeswalkers all the way back in Lorwyn, one of our thoughts was that we wanted the Planeswalkers to feel special and kind of separate. Like, these are outsiders, and so we specifically didn't put set mechanics onto Planeswalkers. Like it was a rule that we didn't do that. But what we found over the time, like originally, by the way, when we made Planeswalkers, they were going to show up like once every third or fourth set. And the players really became fond of them, and we really realized that they became sort of the main sort of our story characters and stuff. And so we ended up putting them every set and ended up putting, 3+ in every set. And so what we discovered was that Planeswalkers have a limited amount of design space. They're actually kind of hard to design. And so one of the things we started adapting is let's find more ways to make them feel special and different from set to set. And one of the ways to do that is to use the mechanics of the set. Like Jace uses Kicker. Nissa uses Landfall. We can't make that Jace or that Nissa in any set, but we can make them here. And so we've actually kind of gone 180 from the original idea, which now we really want to embrace what makes this Jace in this setting different from other Jaces. Oh, well, this gets to be, now you get to kick Jace, and a lot of people are happy to kick Jace.
All right, well, let's get to some of your questions. I believe the first question we have coming up is about modal double-face cards. Mark, did you find there to be constraints on the complexity of the backsides of modal double-face cards?
Well, one of the reasons that, so we're going to do modal double-face cards in all 3 sets this year, this Magic year. We started with the most simple. The reason Zendikar, the nice thing about starting here is Zendikar is the land set, so it being the set that has the lands on the back makes a lot of sense, and lands are the simple, like a land attacked for 1 color is the simplest thing you could do, and since we're introducing modal double-face cards, we thought that was the great introduction. I will say, in the upcoming sets that have modal double-face cards, they're going to be more complex than it can tap for 1 mana. So we will be playing around with what we can do with the complexity on the backside. Trust me, we're playing around with that. Ask this question in 6 months from now, and we'll talk.
So we're letting people get used to it and then pulling them along for the ride. Yeah, makes sense. All right, the next question we have comes from Michael, and he asks, going forward, how much of the party mechanic will we be seeing?
Well, I mean, the party mechanic is, it is a mechanic for Zendikar right now. I mean, it's any future set that wants to use party where party makes sense, like any mechanic we make, it's free that people can use it. It's not really deciduous necessarily, meaning it's not something we plan to use. Like a deciduous mechanic is a mechanic that any set can use at any time. It's not really that. It's a set mechanic. There has to be a reason to use it. There has to be justification to use it. But the nice thing about the party mechanic is the party mechanic cards get to show up in Zendikar Rising, but we're going to make more clerics and rogues and warriors and wizards. Look at the worlds we're going to. There might be some of those showing up in some of those worlds. And Magic in general, those are classes we do in most worlds. So we will be making a lot more cards that go into the party deck, but not necessarily with the party mechanic, unless we find sets where it makes sense.
So, Michael, that's a strong maybe. Next up, we have a question about the list. Will the list change from set to set and or be in the upcoming set? So first, Mark, what is the list?
The list is in our set boosters, which is a brand new way to sort of open Magic. We started making these boosters that are optimized to be the most fun opening experience you can. Draft boosters are meant for limited play, but if you're not going to do a limited play, just going to rip open the booster, Zendikar Rising introduces this brand new thing called the set booster. In the set booster, there's an ad card, and I believe 1 in every 4 packs, instead of an ad card, you get a card from the list. And the list is
This is one from the
list
list.
is,
Where'd it go?
how
There
many
we go.
cards are on the list? It's hundreds of cards.
So many. It is a lot. I don't remember.
It's
300
hundreds of cards, and they're cards from Magic's past, and they're what we call pickups, meaning they look as they looked from last you saw them, meaning we're not relaying them out. They're similar to how we did mystery boosters. There's a little planeswalker symbol in the bottom corner, but they look as they looked. The plan is that we're going to have set boosters for all our premier sets, and the list will subtly change from set booster to set booster, meaning what's in the list from Zendikar Rising and what's in call time, there'll be some shifting. A lot of cards will stay the same. The majority of the list will stay the same from set to set. Each set will rotate the cards in and out. So over time, the list will keep evolving, and so it will keep changing. And every set, we're going to bring in some stuff that maybe is cool that relates to the set that it's in.
Yeah. Next question we have is from Poppy Robbie. Will we ever go back to Dominaria?
Yes, we will. We will go back to Dominaria. It is a much beloved world. It's Magic's original home world. The Dominaria set did gangbusters well. And so I always like to say success breeds repetition. So have no worry, Dominaria lovers. At some point, yes, I have every faith we will return to Dominaria.
Well, it's hard not to return to Magic's original world. So many of our characters are from there or have connections there. We still have Liliana traipsing about the multiverse, and she's from Dominaria. Nicol Bolas is lurking behind the scenes still, and Dominaria is still his home. And then we have, let's see. Okay, I think I am being told that is all the time we have. Unfortunately, there were some great questions we didn't get to. Mark, if people still have questions for you, how can they send you questions?
Well, I have a blog on Tumblr called Blogatog, where I answer questions every day. And since I started 7 years ago, I've answered over 100,000 questions. So if you want to know something, please come to my blog and ask me. And it's a lot of fun. I answered lots of questions, and come talk to me.
So if you didn't get your question answered here, we apologize, we ran out of time. Go ask Mark on Blogatog. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. That's all the time we have. I hope you enjoy your day at Pulse Con. Thanks, Mark, for sharing all the secrets. Stay tuned for more from Dungeons & Dragons.
Well, happy to be here. Thanks, guys, for joining us.